be sharp-eyed enough to know that I am neither Councillors McKenna nor Councillors Gruen. Unfortunately, Councillor McKenna is recovering but ill from COVID. Unfortunately, Councillor Gruen very sadly has suffered a family bereavement, so she can't attend today. As an experienced plans chair and as DPP chair, are members content that I chair the meeting? Yeah? Yeah? Good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your sensible cooperation. On that note, let's get things started properly. So I think we begin. So Debbie, if you could start the webcast when you're finished. It's no rush. Oh, don't start. What's the boot up tune? Is it? Right, well, this is going well this morning, this afternoon even. Yes, it's on the chair. Yeah. But he is recovering, and that's important. Thank you very much. So we're now live on YouTube, folks. So good afternoon. Welcome to City Plans. I'm Councillor Neil Walshaw, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward, and I'll be chairing this afternoon's meeting. So we've got a few comments to make as per usual. So we've been live streamed on the City Council's YouTube channel, so the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City plans deal with applications from the city centre and the larger applications from around the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. So I'm going to now invite members or officers to introduce themselves and then mute your microphone once you've introduced yourself. So I'm going to go to my left. So.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah McMahon, Planning Officer.
Phil Ward, Team Leader, Landscape Heritage and Ecology.
Gillian MacLeod, Transport Development Services Manager.
Councillor Elizabeth Nash from Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Good morning, afternoon. Councillor Peter Carlill, Calverley and Farsley Ward.
Afternoon, everyone. Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Sharon Burt, Middleton Park, substituting for Councillor Garthwaite.
Brian Maguire, Principal Valuer with the District Valuers in Leeds.
Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Good. Councillor. Yeah, put me off track there. Councillor Dan Cohen from the Woodley Ward with a song in my heart.
Good afternoon, not singing Councillor Paul Wadsworth, guys in Rawdon Ward.
Stephen Raleigh, Design Officer.
Good afternoon. Matthew Hills, Legal Officer.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Afternoon all, Daljit Singh, Group Manager, Planning Services.
Thanks all. With that amount of gremlins, can we go back to Zoom? Right, okay, so let's move to our agenda proper. So Debbie, agenda item 1, do you want to run through the items?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or the public. Agenda item 3, there are no late items of business. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests that they may have? I'll take silence as there are none. Under agenda item 5, we have received apologies for absence from Councillors Jim McKenna, Councillor Gruen and Councillor Al Garthwaite. Councillor Sharon Burke is substituting for Councillor Garthwaite. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Right, folks, if you in your papers turn to item 6 minutes of the previous meeting held on the second. Oh, yep.
Apologies, sorry, I did believe that Councillor Graham Latty had sent apologies as well.
Yeah, we'll make sure the minutes reflect that. Yeah, thank you for that. Oof. Lovely, thank you. Right, so folks, if we could turn to the minutes on page, I believe, page 9. So I'm not going to go through these page by page, but the minutes go from page 9 through to many pages because we are an extremely detailed focused council who talk a lot, through to page 21. Is any points of order anyone wants to raise on the minutes or any matters arising? And if not, can somebody move them as a true record? Give you a moment for that. Move from Councillor Cohen. Members content they're a true record from Councillor Carl. Thanks very much. Righty-ho. In that case, without any further ado, let's turn to agenda item 8, which starts on page 23 in your papers, which is the plan application relating to the residential development office development at 2 Great George Street. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to ask members to just bear with me a little bit because I'm doing the clerk's job of moving the slides on. So it's taking me a little bit of time just to get used to that as well as presenting. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, here we go. So we have before us today a scheme for 2 Great George Street, which is to convert the existing office building, former council office building, to apartments with ground floor office use. So we have a listed building and a full application, it being a listed building. And this is the site in red. So members will recall recently we brought the Leonardo building and the car park site in the middle for determination for a student scheme there. And at the time I said that this would come forward as a separate scheme because it has a different applicant and it wasn't ready to come at the same time. But now we feel it is, officers feel it is ready to come. So we're bringing it today. Just a couple of points while I linger on the site location plans for you, just to raise since the report. Well, there's one really, which is that there's been a further Historic England letter received in terms of objection, but reading through it, it's a repeat of their previous second letter that they sent. So it's not, they're not actually raising anything new. They've just resent the second letter again. And also just want to raise from the start that there is a financial viability appraisal on this, which is why we have Brian Maguire here from District Valuers, who has done a review of that, and that's in the appendices for the report in full. But it does mean that we are at 3 affordable units as a result of that. And obviously Brian can delve into that with us later as we go through. So this is the existing building. I'm sure everybody is well aware of it. It's been former council offices and has been vacant since we all moved out of them. And we did have a previous scheme, so we will make reference to that in this for comparison, just so to help members kind of gauge scale, etc. But that previous scheme has fallen away, and the current applicant is putting forward this scheme. So that was the approved scheme, to remind you what it was, and a quick flash of the proposal as is, which is another rooftop extension and reuse of the building. And I will move on to other ones, more detailed ones of those further down the line. So in terms of, I'll start with the floor plans. So the basement doesn't really change. It's a functional basement and it will stay as back of house functioning areas. At ground floor level, you would have office accommodation. And what will happen here is you can probably see at the bottom, so at the top of the screen is Woodhouse Lane. Obviously we don't have streets on here for you, unfortunately, at the top. So it's Woodhouse Lane. To the left is Rossington Street, and then to the bottom is the former car park site in the middle of the site, which will now become landscaped. To the bottom of that, you can see that where we had an existing 20th century entrance, that is removed and replaced with a flush entrance, which again, we've got detail of further through the presentation. And then coming in through that, this will be the stair core and the central circulation core with using the existing lifts, probably refurbishing them as well, for the residential accommodation above. But this level will be for office use still. It's shown as laid out as open plan offices, which the building had previously. So in terms of historic material in the building, because of the way we used it as a council, to be honest, there isn't that much in there. There are particular areas of interest, but on a large scale, it's open plan. But this is indicative in terms of what could be the office space. It could be a different layout with different partitioning. That wouldn't really adversely affect the interior of the building because it is pretty much a shell. There's a few solid walls which will be retained, as you can see on here. In terms of the access to the office, the two side doors to the building, so north and south of the building, will be reused. They haven't been used for a long time, I don't think. And the one to the south actually has level access. The north one has some steps, but that will give accessible level upgrade entrance into the offices. Above that, there is a mezzanine, a small mezzanine set in the middle here for the cycle store. So you can see that's kind of in this area here. And that will be accessed from the lifts. And just to kind of give you a bit more on an orientation of where that is, hopefully you can look at that in your pack as well. But this kind of shows you that there's that mezzanine in the middle, and it also gives you a glimpse that there are other mezzanines further up the building as well as the rooftop extension to get the required level of accommodation the applicant is seeking. This also hopefully shows you that there are some really generous floor to ceiling heights, and there are some figures on here. So where these ones are split and a mezzanine is inserted, the floor to ceiling height is still within the tolerance, so slightly above actually the tolerance levels given in the national space standards for floor to ceiling heights. Moving up into the accommodation, so we have a mix from the 83 units, and we have a mix of, as in the report, 41% are 1 beds, 52% are 2 beds, and 7% are 3 beds. Some of these are duplex, so some of them will span across 2 floors, as is evidenced on this floor plan. All have quite generous floor spaces. Some of them are extremely generous. Again, I put that in the report. So some of the smaller ones, the 1 bedrooms, are at the kind of the tolerance levels for the national space standards, but then the majority of them are actually a lot larger. So there's some really generous accommodation in this scheme. And then that's the second floor of these duplex flats. So you can see they've each got their individual staircases between them. And you can see in the middle here on this plan, the existing staircase off Woodhouse Lane, where you can see the 2 vertical black lines. That is retained as is, as a secondary entrance. So it still would be used, or would be able to be reopened to use as an entrance, because it wasn't used by the previous incumbents because of it being an inaccessible entrance. Because it's a really important feature of the listed building, we wouldn't want any interventions such as stair lifts or anything like that in there. It's got lovely tiles, it's heavily detailed on the frontage. So it becomes a secondary entrance to the residential dwellings, with the primary entrance being the new entrance that I mentioned previously from the former car park site to the west of the building. And then moving up the building, we have a typical floor plan. Again, these are the individual apartments laid out in a kind of a regular grid across each typical floor plan. So I'm not going to show you every floor plan because that's kind of, there's not much point doing so. But as you move up to the roof level, the building starts to step in. So as was evidenced on those earlier images I showed you at the beginning, the roof extension steps in from the main facade of the building. That means you get some terraces for those units that are up there around the edge of differing sizes, depending on where they are in terms of those terraces. And that's the second floor of those rooftop apartments. And then on top, you also get more terraces. Some of those are private terraces, but there's also a large communal terrace in the middle, and also wells within that level to allow plant and AC use and things like that to be hidden away, bearing in mind that we do have an office use at the basement level who might want that kind of equipment to be fed up through the building. And to make sure that nothing appears on the exterior facade of the building as well in terms of unnecessary vents and things like that. So moving on to kind of comparisons of scale and massing. So that's the previous scheme, showing the site section as was, showing the rooftop extension that we previously had at panel, and the outline of the approved scheme. And then that's overlaid on the proposed development. And this is to demonstrate really that we're looking at the red line boundary because the rest is consented. Is really to show you that the outline of the extension is largely of the same height and scale as the previous scheme that we all approved. And then just moving on, I won't dwell too much on the elevations in this form because it's better if we look at the CGIs, but these kind of start to give you an understanding of how the rooftop extension sits on top, the glassy part of the rooftop extension sits on top of the building, how it tries to pick up on the rhythms of the columns in the building below. And that's kind of picked up as we go round the building. There are also kind of more dominant lines on there, which are fins as well, which will be required for solar gain reasons. I'll move back around to this side. And this kind of details that in a bit more prominence, kind of showing how those alignments have been looked at with that rooftop extension. One other thing to say about the rooftop extension is that it's in two parts. And again, I've got a better slide on this, but the glassy part is the top part, and I've detailed this in the report, so to try and explain what's happening. But then below that, the previous scheme did have an increased parapet height, and in this scheme we have that as well, but it's more pronounced this time. And we have a scheme here which replicates the detail of the historic building in that section of the lower area. And on this also, we've got just some examples of materiality for that, the glassy part of the extension, to kind of show the sort of finish or quality we could get from this. And again, this is just to kind of demonstrate other examples of buildings which have quite detailed facades in some instances, and a much more simpler, calmer rooftop extension, and to demonstrate that the glassiness can change depending on the weather conditions, the light conditions, etc. So this is the comparison slide that I referred to before. So on this side, on the right hand side, you can see the existing arrangement, which has this parapet at the top, and we've been up today on top of this and peered through these to look at the views. And what will happen here is, from this level on upwards, there is a requirement to alter the building here to get the level of accommodation in and to increase the height of it, but without making it top heavy. So the aim here in replicating the existing building is to make sure that the upper part, the glassy part, isn't the dominant feature, and is within the outline, the massing that we've previously approved. Largely, and I'll explain what I mean by that shortly. Obviously, there are different ways to do this in terms of replicating existing materials and existing detailing. There's some very good examples around, such as we've got one in Leeds, which is Broadgate, the former Lucy's, has been finished off, had a whole corner finished off to an excellent standard, and it's hard to see the join if you're not looking for it, if you don't realise it's been finished off more recently. So it's really down to quality of finish there, and control of materials and detailing that is important to make sure that this actually works in the way we intend it to. Just moving down to that new entrance. So this is the new entrance as proposed, where we've got the pod building at the moment that sticks out into the car park and the playground area. So it would be picking up references from the other entrances. So the other entrances onto Woodhouse Lane, the north and south entrances on Rossington Street and Great George Street have this portico effect. So the idea is to pick up some of that detailing, but then obviously put more contemporary simple glazed doors underneath it, so we're kind of blending, hopefully sympathetically, the old and the new to create an appropriate entrance. And then also next to those, out in this area, and I'll move on to the landscaping as well, there is also a requirement to put some bin stores somewhere, and we've looked at with the applicant at various options of trying to get those inside the building, and there are levels changes which make that quite difficult, and also the sort of breakthrough of the building we felt would be detrimental to it. So we're looking at these quite slender bin stores with fret cut metal panels on them, trying to make them the most attractive as possible, that would sit in behind the boundary wall, snug up against the building. I can show you where on the landscape plan shortly. And then moving on to a bit more detail. So this is back to the mezzanines. And this is to show you, this is a typical kind of a mezzanine here, here and here, and to show you that you would get these void spaces where you get this double height space in front of the windows so that you wouldn't have them butting right up to the windows. This edge treatment would also be treated in a dark colour so that it would be less prominent, and you would still read the existing windows as the main features of the building. And then in terms of that landscaping, so this is the area between the two sites, and the black rectangles are the bin stores. You can see that we would retain a north-south route through between the two buildings, and there's an opportunity to get some landscaping in there. It would also need to tie in with the landscaping scheme that is indicatively approved on the other scheme, although we've got approval for the student scheme that's in grey at the bottom. And we've agreed some landscaping, a level of landscaping detail that also requires conditions, or has conditions rather, to control the details of landscaping. So we would be looking for both schemes to work together, the applicants for both schemes, to make sure that this is a cohesive space in terms of its landscaping, and we get the best out of it and as much greenery there as possible. And then you can see at the top, in the light well to Woodhouse Lane, there's also an area where you've got little seats, etc., and a bit of greenery there. That would be spill out space for the office use, and would only be accessible through the office accommodation, where a new doorway out into that would be created in the light well. In terms of the landscaping, this is the kind of initial ideas from the applicants about what that could be. So, you know, where we can fit in trees, we certainly will be pushing to do so. But the aim is to get as much greenery in as possible, and get the appropriate species of all types of planting that will thrive in the city centre. And then just to move on to now to the views of the building and the comparison in terms of the massing and height of the extension, and to kind of give you more of an understanding about where we've got to with that. That's existing, obviously, looking across to the site. And then that's the previously approved scheme. And that's the current proposal. So they have put in the approved student scheme behind there for scale and to understand the relationship to it. And the fact that it would step down still. So you can see in terms of the previous scheme and the proposed, the massing of the extension is very similar. Now this proposed scheme does have an extra section on top, which is inset, as I showed you on the plans, and hopefully you can see in your packs as well. That is actually, due to its setback position, not visible in views at close quarter, demonstrated in these views from the applicant, and only visible in distance views. So as I go through these, you'll see that. So existing, previous scheme and proposed. Again, you can't see that top setback level. Existing, previous scheme and proposed. Existing, previous scheme and proposed. And there you can see when you're a bit further away, it starts to, you know, you get a little slice of it appearing. We don't think that's, as officers, we don't think that's harmful. It's within the kind of skyline. It's not over dominating the building in terms of that extra level. And again, existing and proposed. And that's the end of the slides. So I think in terms of where we're at as officers, we think this is kind of come a long way from its first kind of discussions with us. It's a calmer, sleeker approach than the previous scheme, although obviously we all approved the previous scheme and thought that was acceptable. But in terms of its relationship to the main building, we feel that the extension is secondary and doesn't over dominate it due to that the treatment given to the different sections of it. And we consider the uses to be appropriate city centre uses. So we are recommending it for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's an excellent presentation. We've got questions for officers, but before we do questions for officers, could I ask the representatives for the application to come and make yourself comfortable down the front here, if you want to do that? I think because if we have to bring you in any case, members are content with that. Yeah. Okay. So heard the presentation. We've also got the district value here with respect to affordables. Looking for indications for questions from members. Councillor Brooks, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, really. Has regard been taken for local housing need when looking at housing mix on this? Because obviously the policy is 20%, and I know that in the report, it says, given that this scheme offers 7% 3-bed flats and the provision of 3-bed dwellings in the city centre historically stands at around 1%, this proposal would help to increase a percentage of current provision. Now, if the current provision is 1%, then surely if you had 2%, then that would be increasing provision. So I don't understand the argument that's being put forward in the report pack. I think a better way to measure housing mix is to look at what the local need is. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Looking at Sarah, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is in our view a betterment on other schemes that we've had in the city centre, but I take your point in terms of like the approach that's taken to kind of assessing it. We do always ask developers to look at the demographic of the area in the city centre and the demographic aim of the scheme, and to reflect that and take that into account when they are coming up with a housing mix and justifying why it's not 20%. So every time we do get this situation, which we commonly get, as you quite rightly say, in the city centre, that is something that we always ask them to do. It is more than we get on other schemes, so we kind of, it's not the full 20%, but it is a significant improvement on other schemes. We've also got a situation where we've got the financial viability appraisal, which will be a factor as well. And I think if they actually try to achieve the 20%, and Brian might be able to help me on this, that it would be even less viable, and they may not have any affordable in there at all if that was the case. Are you happy for me to ask Brian? Yeah, Brian, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, this is an interesting case in that the extension on the roof, I know I'm not answering the question directly, but the extension on the roof is what we call enabling development. So effectively, the scheme has had to be designed around the best mix that will make it financially viable to provide some affordable. And I'll talk a little bit more about the viability as well, if you like. Yeah, we did challenge a number of the inputs in the viability appraisal in terms of the applicant's view of the benchmark land value, i.e. the property's current value. We also took account of English heritage guidance regarding profitability, because you've got this issue of enabling development where you're granting some additional areas on top of the building. You effectively say, well, you've got to meet in the middle here. So it is correct, therefore, to also reduce the profit margin that the developer should be deriving from the scheme. So the authorities granted some more accommodation to get this scheme to be more viable. So therefore, they should take some of the pain and reduce the profitability on the scheme to get it over the line in terms of viability. The other issue that affected this site, which I don't think I've ever spoken to you about, is the issue of vacant building credits, where there is national and local policies to encourage developers to reuse buildings such as this, whereby some of the construction costs and ancillary matters make it less viable. So what that effectively means is when you apply your affordable housing policy, you only have to provide affordable housing for the additional space that's been created. And that policy is being designed to encourage developers to come forward and redevelop and reuse existing buildings, or they're classed as brownfield sites. So in this instance, we've got enabling development, we've got a lower profit margin that we've applied, and we've taken account of the vacant building credit. And ironically, even though it's only providing 3 affordable houses, strictly speaking, it is a planning compliant scheme. I don't know if Sarah wants to add anything to that. So we've applied your policy that says that they really only have to provide 3 affordable units as opposed to 7, and it is supported by national policy and your Leeds City Council planning policy.
Thanks, Ryan. I think Darcy wanted to come. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I think as well as the considerations that Sarah and Brian have outlined, which have led to our recommendation to you on the mix. In answer to your question, Councillor Brooks, the demand in the city centre is for smaller units, actually. That's reflected by our housing mix policy, where the targets for 1-bed and 2-bed units are much greater than for 3-bed. What we're trying to do through the policy is obviously influence the market by trying to have more choice and some larger units. But the demographics and the nature of city centre is that the demand is for smaller units, actually. But that's not the only thing that informs the policy. We're also trying to change the nature of what's on the market going forward and create more choice. So there is a, but in this case, there is a balancing act. I think just to finish off on Brian's point, the policy, a fully policy compliant position in this case would be 6 units. Because of the vacant building credit, because in this case, there happens to be a vacant building which wasn't abandoned for the purposes of this development. National policy says we can't, if the developer asks us to, we can take that into account and discount that from the floor space from the affordable housing contribution. And that's what Brian's done. And that's left the calculation of 3 units. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Brooks, you content with that assessment?
Reckon I'll have to be, Chair. If it's...
It is compliant, yeah. Okay. Right. Councillor Cohen's next, and then Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 26 and page 27 of the report in front of us, there's some fairly robust objections from both Historic England and the Ancient Monument Society. The challenge whenever we're developing heritage assets is once they're developed, they're gone in terms of their intrinsic heritage value. Could you just speak a little bit more about how you've given weight, or what weight you've given in terms of, you've obviously come out in favour of, on balance, we believe it's appropriate to allow this to go ahead, but I'm thinking particularly of the mezzanines, which both objectors bring significant concern about. Just in terms of, if you just give us some reassurance around that in terms of the weight applied and why that should override these quite serious concerns.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, we do look at that, and what we are weighing up is the balance of how much development will allow the building to actually be redeveloped and brought back into use. Is there a case for saying that there's a level of development here which could cause some harm, and what is that level of harm? Do we think it's less than substantial, or do we think it's substantial? If we think it's substantial, then what can be done to make it less than substantial? So we worked with the developer to try and make sure that the mezzanines in particular were pulled away from the windows, were kind of not the dominant feature, that they weren't on floors where they couldn't accommodate them. And that's essentially the balance that we seek. I don't know if Phil would like to kind of add to that.
Yeah, do
I think it's worth saying that this is quite a usual way of dealing with buildings with proportions of the scale, such as mill buildings with very high floor to ceiling height, and other warehouses in Leeds. Crispin House is a case in point. If you kept everything on one level, you wouldn't have many flats and it wouldn't be viable. So we see this as probably a less harmful way of bringing these buildings back into residential use, if that's the optimum viable use, which it is in this case.
Does that satisfy your questions, Councillor Cohen?
Well, this wasn't and isn't a single, it's not a warehouse. It already has floors. And that's, so no, it doesn't really. So what you're saying, if I'm understanding what you're telling me, is the only way this was viable was by adding in the extra floors. They're necessary for, ultimately they're going to viability again.
It's an example of that tension when you're redeveloping all buildings to the modern world. Councillor Campbell.
Mike, Colin. Dan, throw them. We'll get all those. At least you're not doing you're on mute, Colin, which is what usually happens at this point. I think for Dan's benefit, if you go in there and actually look at the inside of the building, it's built to a set of proportions that we haven't seen in school buildings for best part of 100 years, I think. And I was jokingly saying to my colleague next door, if you actually got a flat there, you'd have a hell of a job painting the ceiling. So I can understand about the mezzanines. I've just got a question actually for the developers, if I could. Yeah. Why didn't you go for a totally residential? I know you got downstairs as offices, but it seems slightly incongruous given what's happening around about. So I just wonder why you didn't go for a complete housing.
Sure, I'll let the architects come in further as well if they wish, but there was a lot to do with that being the ground floor use in quite a fairly busy urban area. I'm not looking to have the apartments at that lower level, still having that mixed use. So there was an element of amenity for future residents in terms of that space there. It is quite close to each of the footpaths. I say it is at that ground level on some quite busy streets. So that was certainly one of the key drivers to it.
Any further questions? Councillor Nash.
Well, thank you. This panel already approved a scheme, which I thought was absolutely ghastly and said so at the time. It's over dominant. And I do like the proposed scheme which has come before us. But on the rooftop extension, could I just ask about a detail? I think it was I that suggested on the Thorsby building that the rooftop extension be glass to reflect the light into especially Rossington Street, which is rather narrow and can be rather dark. But on the illustration, there is a sort of a dark rib or edging to the top of it. And I also noticed that there are struts down the side. Could this not be all glass so that when you are further away, it does disappear into the sky?
Thanks, Councillor Nash. Fellas, do you want to speak to that point? I think if bring meteorology, bring architect in, however you want to answer it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'll something briefly first. Just there, a lot of it is in the presentation and the imagery there, but it will be a very fine line on the top. That will just be a detail in which we'll work through with Sarah and Phil in terms of 1 to 20 details to make sure it is a very fine and neat finish. The vertical fins are to do with protected against solar glare. Obviously, glass boxes, they can heat up, so they're there for that element. Again, they will be worked through on the conditions, 1 to 20 details and samples to make sure they are refined in that sense.
And Chair, just to add, there is actually some hedging around the edges of the roof terraces, so you can actually see a little bit of that. So those solid black, blacky dark greeny edges could be some of that as well, because they are showing kind of, because that is something we've talked about as well in terms of getting some hedging around the edge, so you didn't get you couldn't see lots of paraphernalia when people put stuff out on their terraces.
Councillor Nash.
If I could just say, it wasn't the lower edging, it was the top. I mean, when you look at that image, there's quite a distinct black line all around the top.
Okay, any further questions from members? No, I'm not seeing any indication. Should we move into comments then? And then we can move to a determination. Councillor Blackburn and then Councillor Cohen.
I've got to say, looking at this and when we went round this morning, it's a far better scheme than the one that was passed. We won't go into that, but a few of us weren't too happy about that scheme, but it's far better than that. I think we've got to, it's either not go with this or stop with other or take it on trust. I've got to say, one of the impressions of this looks like a metal box stuck on top of a building, and other one looks quite nice. And I am assuming we're going to get the quite nice. It's going to be more near the quite nice than the metal box. All I'm hoping so. But certainly it's far, far better than what's got planning permission previously. As regards having the mezzanine levels in and that, there's a couple of former Victorian schools in my ward where they've put in floors like that, where they've had these really big arch windows, and they are gorgeous. And they produce a wonderful view, and they don't affect the look of the building outside. So I'm quite happy to support this. As I say, I'm just concerned about how it finished up looking, and I think we've got to go with this.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Cohen.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be quite brief, which is always a rarity. I think this is actually a fairly decent proposal. I agree that the original one wasn't perhaps one of the finest pieces of architecture to ever grace this committee. It's going to bring an unused building back into use. The explanation behind the mezzanines seems to me to perfectly address the concerns that stakeholders have raised. I think the sooner we get this going, the better. And on that basis, I'll move, Chair.
We've got a mover. I'll bear that in mind. We're going to bring other members who've indicated. So next is Councillor Wadsworth, then Councillor Nash, then Councillor Campbell.
I think we're all going to come from the same angle. The previous scheme. You want to? Oh, you gotta stop. The previous scheme that was consented had the horrible roof extension, and I think Stephen did sell it to us in the end. And Sarah has done a good salesman job on the rooftop extension this time. I think on par, when you get the two together on the slides that we've seen, I think it's better. I think it will be more visible than we're led to believe it will be. And I think Councillor Nash's view around getting rid of that line along the top so it blends into the sky. But Liz, the sky is grey quite often in Leeds, so it doesn't really matter, does it, too much? It's never going to fit the sky all the time. It's a good use for the building. The mezzanines, I just have worries about how they're going to be heated. There is some mezzanines on the City Island project, which are dreadful. They're dreadful to look at, they're dreadful to live in, and they're dreadful to heat from what I've get from people who've lived in them. And it's just about getting it right at the end of the day. And I expect that the extra story that's going on will be getting that right. If it's a good job, you'll have done a good job. That is for the developer's benefit. If it's not a bad job, well, probably don't come back. But it is about building control probably, and how that is built rather than how it is passed up planning. But I'm happy to support it.
Thanks for that, Councillor Wadsworth. Colleagues will note that there's in 10.43, there's discussion about connecting to the district heating system, for example, and use of air source heat pumps. Well, various top forms of heat pump technology. So that's probably it. I think we've moved on a step from City Island, I think, in terms of materials and design. It does indeed. Physics is not that different from 2020, from the year 2000. Councillor Nash.
Well, I'd like to know who it was who voted for the previous scheme, because I didn't. And everybody is saying it's ghastly. And if we don't approve this scheme, and this isn't the reason why I'm voting for it now, but if we don't approve this scheme, then we'll be reverting back to the ghastly scheme that obviously the majority of this panel voted for in the first place. I think I've noted the comments which English Heritage and Leeds Civic Trust have made about the building. They don't want any extension. Well, I think we would all like original buildings to stay exactly as they are from the outside. But if the only way that listed buildings or old buildings can be preserved is to find another use for them. And the only way this can be viable is to have extensions so that there are sufficient residential accommodation to pay for the restoration of the building. I have to say I'm very pleased indeed that the front door on Woodhouse Lane, although not to be the main entrance, is to be used as a secondary entrance, and I think the majority of residents will use it. It was discounted before when it was totally office space because it wasn't accessible to all. But there will be an accessible entrance into the forecourt, and I think a very good job has been done with that. I should have asked this as a question, but it would be nice if the former brick and stone pilasters were cleaned so that it does look like a new building. And I think somebody's moved that we accept this scheme, and I would certainly like to second that.
And just a point on the cleaning, Councillor Nash, yes, we thought about that too, and we said that to the applicants. So we'd asked them if they were considering cleaning, we'd put a condition on that basis for the methodology.
Thanks for clarifying that. And we've had a second, but I've just got Councillor Campbell and Councillor Brooks, and then we'll move to a determination.
Well, normally, Chair, at this point, I'll be mentioning affordables, but I think we've had it explained to us that if effectively this is policy compliant. I don't like it, but it's policy compliant. And I have to say it's been a first for me, these empty building credits. I didn't know about those. And I hope there aren't too many more of them coming up the path. I'm not going to repeat what everybody else has said, but I think there are two things that struck me on site today. And I asked a question of the developers. And within the building, there are a number of original features, and there are areas that are covered in a sort of a glazed brick, which was typical of the time. But I do think that we need to be careful that we don't lose that glazed element within the building, because it's a fairly unique piece of as an architectural feature, and I wouldn't like that to go. I'm assuming we're hanging on to all the rest of the cast iron work and all the rest of it, which is sort of typical Victorian school stuff. I think the issue on the roof, I know we all say it's a lot better than it was before, and none of us are admitting to voting for it. But I have to say, I'm never sure that using the argument that, well, if we don't give this permission, they'll go back and build that, is ever that valid, because if they were going to do that, they wouldn't be here with the apply application now. So what we have to say to ourselves is, if this was a completely new application and we look at what they want to do with the roof, bear in mind what Liz said about bringing older buildings back into use, is this reasonable? I have to say that I'm sort of 75% there. And the problem I have, of course, is that the detailing we're given really doesn't give me the opportunity to visualize what it might look like. And I think I'm a bit like Liz. I as I said on site to her, I'd like the idea that the glass floated on top of the building rather than being heavy, or the metal struts, or what we're calling them, which I understand about solar game, whether they become the feature that you see. And so can I put up a marker for a discussion with officers, or officers to have a discussion with the applicant about effectively making it, as Liz says, as much glass as possible and as little metal as possible. And I think that helps lighten that whole facade. And generally, I'm quite supportive of the scheme.
Thanks for that. And yeah, it's a good point, well made. I think we can add that to what officers are making notes with regard to the details. Councillor Brooks.
Similarly to Councillor Campbell, I am concerned about the affordables, but as has been pointed out, there's nothing that we can do about that. I do support the use as residential. I've got some concerns about the office use. I'm not sure that that's going to be viable in the long term, but again, it's not my building. So yeah, I'm not happy with the housing mix or affordables, but there's nothing to be done with that. So I suppose I'll grudgingly support this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Noted on the affordables, and I don't disagree. Councillor Campbell, you wanted to come back again?
Sharing my enthusiasm, I forgot something. Can I raise the issue of token planting? Now, this is a site that really emphasises the point I've made on more than one occasion about the city centre, is that you come along to us and say there's a bit of greenery, and it is a bit of greenery. You know, even if it's a hedge, that's. Now, I appreciate that the site itself does not lend itself to a substantial piece of green space work, but I often think that things like this, it's hardly worth bothering because they're not likely to get maintained, or the maintenance will be limited. They don't really fulfill a function. And so I think it's a case of saying, how do we look at developments like this and in effect pool the green space elements of those into a meaningful space within the centre somewhere? And I just throw that one in because I think we need to keep repeating that we need some green spaces for people who live residential. This is going to be a residential, and I've said it before. If it's a pleasant summer evening, where do you go out and sit? And there isn't anywhere, and that's a problem.
And just to say, yeah, totally take on board what you're saying, and I absolutely agree. You know, we should be pushing for as much greenery as possible on schemes, but it has to be right and it has to be kind of appropriate and not a token gesture. It needs to be thought through, and a proper landscape scheme needs to be worked up. So that's something that I will expect the applicants to be looking at and getting a landscape architect on board to work it up and to work up a scheme that works with the student scheme, so that we do make the best of the space we've got. We've got limited space, as you said, quite rightly, but we need to maximise on that, and a good landscape architect would be able to work the two schemes together and make them be a cohesive space.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Right, it's been moved by Councillor Cohen. It's been seconded by Councillor Nash. So, Dad, do you want to sum up before we move to a determination?
Yes, happy to. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the majority of members, well, all members are supportive of the scheme. There's been some concerns raised about ensuring that we get the detailing of the roof extension right, and officers will engage with the applicant to make sure that's as lightweight as possible. Yep. One member is, well, more than one member has raised the fact that they're not completely happy with the affordable housing position, but accept that that's a policy, and both the national and local policy position, compliant position. But overall, members are supportive of the scheme, and it's been moved for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Given that, can I have a show of hands in favour? I think that's unanimous. No against, no abstentions. Duly passed. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for attending, folks. So if you want to move on then to item 9. Phil, you mean you're not staying for the rest? Oh, fair enough. Thank you for attending. That's it. We've been very efficient. Right. So
We just need to get the pre-apps scheme.
Yep, pre-app folks, if you want to come down to the, I say to the front, but it's kind of counterintuitive, to the rear of the group. Thank you. Make yourself at home. No worries.
Councillor Brooks.
Right, folks, let's resume. Do we have a problem with the?
Yeah,
Okay,
just tell me
just
next slide.
Giving you distance, if you could just send a suitable maroon or flare or something, we'll try to see it. We may have to rearrange the room as we get back into more normal spacing. Right, agenda item 9, which is the pre-app for the redevelopment of the land of Water Lane, Holbeck. So, Sarah, in your hands once again.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just do a really brief introduction to the scheme, just to say that it is for a residential scheme. That number of units is incorrect, and it's also slightly wrong on part of the report. We have had a number of iterations of this one. So it's actually 360 residential units in the scheme at the moment, unless Tim's going to tell me different today, in step blocks. And just to say, it's also an area that's identified for housing in the allocations. So obviously from that point of view, we're supportive of it. And I'll hand over to the guys to crack on with it, the presentation.
Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Matthew Biddle. I'm Managing Director of McLaren Living. We are the developers for the site. First of all, thank you very much for giving us the time this afternoon to hear our proposals. McLaren Living is part of the McLaren Construction Group. We're a construction-led developer. We've got a keen focus on delivery. We manage our construction sites in-house through our own in-house construction teams. You may have come across my colleagues on previous applications. We've last year we secured planning on Wellington Street, an office development in Wellington Street, and more recently this summer we secured planning for the student scheme at the Leonardo's building just next door to the previous applicant. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Tim, our architect, who will take you through our presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. I think you walked around the site this morning, so I probably won't dwell on location and so on, but it's very well connected, very much an underused site, and obviously in the context of the scheme that's been permitted already on the Midland Mills site, we think this could be, a really quite exciting addition to it. And very much our approach, as you'll see in the scheme, is about complementing the current proposals. And if the two can come together, I think it really will be a very exciting scheme. So would you mind going forward? So some photos, and as I say, it's very much underused, and sort of a prime development site. Thank you, Sarah. So there's obviously we're in the context of quite a lot happening in the area, and I think we've put this slide up just to show that the sort of scale and sort of approach in terms of architectural forms is something that we want to follow and complement. And I think with the Midland Mills Tower, very early on the discussions we had with Sarah and her team was, the scheme shouldn't compete with that scheme. And I think, that's been very much part of the driving behind, the concepts that we've got in front of you today. Thank you, Sarah. And just a quick shot of the approved scheme. Just it's probably showing the car park a little bit, doing a lot of sort of flattering it a little bit. So you can probably see in this slide the area where our scheme will occupy. It's basically where the car park is with the trees. Thank you, Sarah. So we've had some really good dialogue with officers, and I have to say the scheme's got really improved throughout that dialogue. So we've had 3 pre-app meetings. You'll probably see on the first little slide, we were proposing to put the taller part of the building to the west of the site, almost as a sort of an entry point into the site. And one of the first moves we made after the meeting was to reverse that and relocate the height to the east of the site, so that it then becomes a sort of a bookend for the Midland Mills building. We also have pulled back the northern facade back away from the boundary, so as to sort of reveal more of the historic Mills building, particularly as you come in off Water Lane, and you'll see that in some of the visuals. And then some of the later discussions we've had have really been concentrating on the form of the taller building. And it was considered that some of our previous proposals were a bit blocky. The towers felt a little bit wide, perhaps not in keeping with some of the other buildings in the area. So we've worked really hard to sort of slim that down, get it down to about 24 meters wide, which again is sort of consistent, not only with the Midland Tower, but also other buildings in the area. Thank you, Sarah. So some of the key benefits the scheme delivers. I think, first of all, it's bringing a very much an underused site, bringing that forward. A key benefit that we've obviously pursued throughout is to create a link from Bath Road through our site, potentially through the Mills building, as was indicated in their permitted scheme, but certainly through the site off Bath Road onto Water Lane. And it's designing in a generous sort of green finger that runs through the site. We can't guarantee the connection onto Bath Road at the moment, but that's something very much our client is going to have discussions with adjoining landowners to try and bring that forward. And then in terms of the building form, it's pretty much 2 buildings that are connected at ground floor. So it is a build to rent scheme. So having that connection at ground floor is important. So pretty much a single point of entry that you can then work your way through the building. But we've articulated as 2 building forms that try and add visual interest by interlocking rectangles and a sort of variety of scale as well. We've also worked really hard to sort of tuck away as much of the car parking as we can out of view. So some of our previous proposals were actually using the green finger to have sort of site car parking. Again, through some really good discussions we've had with Sarah and her team, we've now located the bulk of the parking into a sort of a podium parking area, which will have a sort of a podium deck over the top and a green wall along the facade as well. So very much out of view. The sun path, because of the orientation on the site, so you're looking at the plan where the north is pointing to the left. So we've kept the heights down on the southern boundary, and we've created a gap between the 2 buildings, again, to sort of get as much natural sunlight into the amenity areas as we can. Thank you, Sarah. And then just to show that we have done some studies just to check our building width is consistent with other buildings. So we've just taken some of the buildings either permitted or on site at the moment, sort of tabulated those in a diagram at the top, just to give you that comfort that, I think we've now got to a width that is in keeping with the other buildings in the area. So this is the sort of the master plan drawing. And as you'll see, as part of a build to rent product, outdoor amenity space is really important. So not only do we have sort of the green finger running through the site, that's for public use. but also there's a considerable amount of private amenity space for residents. So not only on the podium deck, which is at the heart of the scheme, where the sort of the internal amenity space will sort of face onto and open out onto, but we're also trying to use as much of the roof space as we can for additional amenity space. And what that does is create different character areas for residents. And when we have the landscape architect on board, those are areas that we can work up in more detail for you. We have allowed additional roof space, which we haven't provided amenity for. That is for potential future PVs, or if we are going to go down an air source heat pump rule, that will give that space available. So we've tried to keep that flexibility built in the scheme for now. Thank you. So this is the ground floor. We're not proposing to put any residential units on ground floor. So the bulk of it is car parking, but as I say, a lot of the car parking is tucked away out of view. And so we have some of the additional spaces, so bicycle storage, plant space, and refuse storage. The main entry point to the scheme is that sort of darker green area to the left of your slide. So the entry point will be off Water Lane, but as I say, hopefully in the future of time, we can provide additional entry points off Bath Road as well. You can also see a sort of more detailed plan of that green sort of finger running through the site. In terms of its width, it's 4 to 5 meters wide, so plenty of opportunity to do something really interesting with the landscaping. And you'll also see quite a dark black line running along the left-hand side, and that's where we're proposing to put a green wall, a little image on the top left-hand there. That might take a number of sort of ways of doing that, but we're probably looking at something that uses climbers to go up a sort of a trellis, as it were. We've also been very mindful about the relationship of the building to the railways and the viaduct at the rear. And so we've kept sort of the building facade back so that we're not getting any clashes with embankments and so on. We do have to respect a no-build zone as well with Network Rail. So that will inevitably push it back away from the boundaries. Thank you, Sarah. And then just onto a typical floor. So 2 main cores. We've provided an additional means of escape for the slightly bigger building to the bottom of the slide. A mixture of 1 bed, 2 beds, and 3 beds. So we're looking at 5% 1 bed, 1 person apartments, 50% 1 bed, 2 person, 40% 2 beds, 3 or 4 persons, and 5% 3 bedroom apartments. And I know one of the questions for you today is whether you're happy with that mix. And I'm sure Matthew can answer any questions on that. We've also incorporated a considerable amount of amenity space. So in terms of the outdoor amenity space, we're circa 23% of the site area is allocated for outdoor amenity space. And internal amenity space was circa 5,000 square feet, which again is really important for build-to-rent schemes. Thank you, Sarah. All the units will be designed to the current standards, both national and local, and looking to put high quality living accommodation within the scheme, as well as good quality amenity space for the residents as well. Thank you, Sarah. So in terms of heights, the building ranges from 26 stories at its tallest point, and that element is quite slender, as we've talked about. Really then stepping down to a shoulder building of sort of 9 stories. It does pop up a little bit onto Water Lane, up to 10 stories. But it's really trying to keep the shoulder as low as possible. And we've tested that in some of the views, which you'll see later. So that it's the taller element that becomes visible and sort of becomes the marker for the site. Thank you. In terms of the appearance, I mean, we're quite early days, but again, we've had some very good direction from your officers, which I think is very valid and works really well. But what we did want to do was draw on the materials, some of the detailing, some of the motifs that are on the Mills building. So it has a Mills type sort of character to it, but we wanted to make it very much feel part of the site. So we're looking to try and match some of the brickwork, some of the fenestration details, and even sort of some of the roof space, using sort of the corrugated metal and trying to reflect that into the scheme as well. Thank you, Sarah. And then we've got, we've been encouraged to keep it simple. So we have pulled back a little bit from some of the detailing. And I do agree, I think it does need to have a simple palette and a simple layer of detailing. So we've designed the brickwork to emphasize the verticality. So that's the sort of the top left precedent image, so strong vertical piers, which again, you'll see in the Mills building. And then with a sort of a lighter horizontal banding, looking at a lighter colored material, maybe a stone-like material, again, picking up on some of the materials used in the Mills building. And then a regular pattern of windows that's sort of consistent across all the elevations, but then creating sort of subtle differences in terms of the different types of buildings. So the bookends, having a sort of an extra layer of detailing within the windows that isn't in the sort of the lower shoulder buildings. Quite subtle, but and also maybe look at slight variance of brick color as well. Thank you. And these some of early elevations just to sort of help you understand, that sort of simple approach, but good quality, sort of glazing, good amount of glazing, sort of regular patterns. In terms of balconies, again, some of our earlier schemes, we were exploring offsetting the balconies. But again, we were sort of encouraged to keep it simple and have the balconies line up. We're looking at about 25% balcony provision. That's fairly typical for a build to rent scheme. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but residents are encouraged to use the communal amenity spaces. As I say, we've got in excess of 5,000 square feet. Indoor and a considerable amount of outdoor amenity space as well. So where we are providing balconies, we're probably looking to allocate those to sort of 3 beds and the 2-bed accommodation. Thank you, Sarah. And this is the main view, sketch view as you're coming into the site. And this for us is an important view, sort of close view. It's the main entry point to the site, but also hopefully you can see by pulling the building away from the boundary, we've sort of opened up the site and open up the views of the Midland Mills building as well. And it almost creates a bit of a frame for the building. And particularly also that works really well with the green finger running through the site. As you may be aware, when you looked at the building, looked at the site, there is this wall in front of Midland Mills building. We hope that there'll be an opportunity to take that away. I mean, we've designed the scheme that allows for that, should the adjoining owners want to do that. And I think that would be a massive plus point for the overall site. But also you can just see in this view as well, the green wall in the distance too. And, I think that's the right approach. And I think it provides a bit of a backdrop as well for the Mills building. And finally, you can see we've stripped all car parking from the front of the site. So if you saw earlier versions of this, you would have seen quite a few cars at the front there. So all those have been shifted out of view. Thank you, Sarah. And then really, I probably won't dwell on these. I'll probably leave it for questions, but we've got a number of long range views, all of which we've been running in tandem with the design to test not only the building proportions, but also to sort of show that, the building, I think, is respectful, particularly to the east of some of the historical buildings in that area. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, so no doubt there'll be questions. So going to open that over Councillor Campbell and Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. I'll go through everything, so I might do my quick comments at the same time, if you don't mind, Chair. There were 2 things on there that aren't necessarily within your gift to give, but I think it's worth acknowledging them and giving them the strength that they need. In terms of removing the wall, then yeah, that exactly ties into what you're trying to do with the scheme. And I understand that it's not your wall, but that's certainly something that we want to see, so that you get that idea that it's really one scheme, one area, one neighbourhood in there. The access on Bath Road as well, then I think that is certainly something you'd want to see, because this provides then a corridor through from there. To be honest, it's more for people coming from the Bath Road area and coming towards through your site and into town, because that would provide a much better route. I guess then my questions, I'm looking at the one other comment I just wanted to make, looking at the slide which showed the different stages you've been at. I think that really showed the value of the pre-app process that we've got, because I can see exactly where the conversations with officers have been there, and it's great to see that it's completely different but much better when we're seeing the final size of the buildings. I know that doesn't go into the other detail. I guess then I'm going to come on to the landscaping and the green finger, so to speak, as of it, because I think with the site, what I'm looking at here is we've obviously got 360 residential units. We've got a number of other units around the area, all tying into this one neighbourhood that isn't at the moment the most attractive place to walk around or visit or probably to live. But this scheme is one of those that's bringing it through. Looking at it, we've obviously only got 50 car parking spaces on this site, so we're imagining that the majority of people will come walking or on bike to the site. So I think when you're looking at that green finger and then the access, when we look at the landscape and the entrance, the access to the site being, I get that it's probably a paved finish or something there that we're looking at, but actually it's quite a traditional curbed entrance to a site that will only be used by a few services and 50 cars. I wondered whether you'd thought further around whether that could be tied in further with the green space, become more like the public realm, become probably a space that is predominantly for the people walking and cycling around the area rather than just the others. And I'm thinking in terms of, you know, a straight crossing, like a Copenhagen crossing style thing across the entrance, so that pedestrians aren't necessarily waiting there and having another place to cross, and then tying that in so when somebody arrives at the area, it looks like one piece of open green space, something which you don't get in that area very much. And really the cars are a secondary element to it as far as I see in the building. I mean, that opens the question of then Water Lane, which I think the more developments that come in this area, this might be more to officers than others, but the more developments we get in the area, Water Lane sort of stands out as a somewhat unattractive road to wander around. And I know we'll know about that, but it's interesting then looking at what we can ask from the developments that come in the area to gradually improve that. So maybe that's a couple of questions there. One around the landscaping outside the site, and then maybe one to officers just around Water Lane and what the aspirations are in terms of that.
Thanks, Peter. Do you want to come in first of all, and then Sarah can pick up the points to officers? Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we're very mindful of that arrival experience. Actually, we have, sorry, I may have slightly misled you. We have actually recently engaged with a landscape architect who has started to look at it. We didn't feel their proposal were quite right yet, but actually, interestingly, that sort of thinking you've had, a sort of a shared surface, almost what they're thinking of is a slightly elevated platform that you arrive on. That's also like a traffic calming measure as well for any cars, so that you're sort of slightly blurring sort of traffic and pedestrian and cycle movements through the site. So that's certainly the thinking we're looking at. Perhaps also I didn't draw your attention to that the sort of green, I'm calling it a green finger, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying, is actually when you come to Water Lane, there's actually quite a large bit of green space proposed on the Midland Mills site next to us. And we're looking again to blur those two together so the two become one space. So I think when you have the two together, it will feel a lot greener than perhaps is currently indicated.
In terms of kind of the wider area and Water Lane itself, there are other schemes that are contributing to highways works improvements on Water Lane, Midland Mills next door being one of them, which has an area at the end of Silver Street, which is contributing to offset highways works. So I would expect that we will be looking at extending that further along in terms of wider works, because they see the kind of there's a lot of stuff that's a bit piecemeal at the moment in terms of linking to developments. I don't know if Gillian knows of any wider interventions in the area, but there's very focused ones that are related to individual schemes coming forward. Is there anything else, Gillian, that you can advise on?
Thank you, Chair. I think that there's certainly a lot going on in terms of discussions for the area, and you know, there are aspirations already in the Holbeck SPD, and we have historically taken public realm contributions from, you know, a lot of the developments in this area. So I think it's something certainly we can feed back and you know, look to see what can be achieved here. I think that there are discussions about, it's not just about the surfacing and the routes, but also about I suppose removal of through traffic and you know, that whole discussion to make this more of a walkable neighbourhood. So those discussions are clearly ongoing, and we'll see what we can do in terms of making sure this ties in.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Pete, do you want to do a follow-up or? Okay. Okay, Councillor Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. So I notice on slide 68, there's some kids playing in the bottom left of the slide. And I was just wondering, in what way is it going to be a family-friendly development? Like what additional family-friendly infrastructure such as playgrounds and things like that are you going to include in the development?
Andrew, you might want to come on to sort of area-wise, but there's we haven't got into that detail yet, but there's plenty of scope for children's play areas within the landscaping at sort of allocated areas we've got. So I guess that will be our next stage. Yeah, as I say, you probably saw the amount of green on the plan, and we haven't sort of quite pinpointed where they'll go. And, you know, I think particularly for some of the younger years is to make that integral within the landscaping, you know, as play space.
So it is intended to be a family-friendly development, so that you are intending it to be family-friendly.
I'll just pop in there. I mean, in terms of the public open space, it's going to be family friendly. It's going to be friendly for everybody. It's going to be open to the general public. In terms of the residents, there will be a proportion that will of accommodation which will be suitable for families. So the 3-bed apartments. So some of our residents will quite possibly have young families as well. So there will be appropriate amenities for young families as well. Does that answer your question?
I've got a follow-up if that's okay.
I'm sure you do.
If you are intending to have families living there, would you consider increasing the amount of 3-bedroom provision so that more families can live there?
I think in terms of the mix of the accommodation, this is derived from a detailed review of the demographics for built to rent. And I'm sure it's not news to you that the demand for 3-bedroom apartments isn't a very strong seam of demand. But there is an element of residents who do look for 3-bedroom apartments. Now, that may be 3 parties sharing an apartment, or it may be a family. All we can do is provide a mix which is geared towards where the demand is. Whether it's families or sharers, it's down to market forces in terms of who's likely to accommodate those 3-bedroom apartments.
Thank you for being patient with me, Chair. So yeah, I understand what you're saying about the market forces and things, but in terms of good quality new developments that are coming forward, the majority of them seem to be in the city centre. There's not that much going on outside of the city centre at the moment. Not that much. There isn't. That's affordable for people and accessible for people. Like so, and the demand for 3 beds in the city centre, I think, is going to rise, and so
I suppose this is a wider sort of strategic question, Chair, really. So I think maybe we could put that on development plan panel thing, but I just wanted to sort of raise it as a concern, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, further to that, we've got a backdrop of very high house prices, generally speaking, in Leeds. It's inevitable that build to rent in the city centre and environs is going to have people who are starting families in them, and maybe even longer than that. And I just think we developers and officers need to be mindful of that. And this is why I like pre-apps, because we can put strong markers down as elected members as to what folk need to be alive to and considering. So yeah, I very much agree with Councillor Brooks. Right, Councillor Wadsworth, you're next.
Expect to be so soon. It's very brief, actually. It's a plea for more balconies. And particular internal situated balconies, because obviously external balconies do give you a wind problem with draft, but with the with the tyranny that we're just coming out of, or hopefully we come out of it, balconies are invaluable to people. And the panel have heard this story many times, but I'll tell it just quickly for you. Is I've got a friend who has been shielding for 6 months, and she's in a 9th floor council flat, and she has a very, very small balcony, which I don't go out on. But she tells me that it's been her lifeline, and she wouldn't have been here if she hadn't had the balcony. She'd have been jumping off the non-balcony. And so they are a lifeline. And I take the point of wanting to enhance the public space, and particularly the indoor space, but you might not always be able to use it in times when we have a lockdown, should we ever have one again. So private balconies are something that I would encourage you to put in where you can. I mean, obviously, if you can't sell flats with private balconies, you won't put them in. I mean, it comes back to Councillor Brooks's point. If you can sell 3 bedrooms, I guess you'll put more in. If you can't sell them or rent them, you won't put them in, will you? It's what you can rent. But I would plea for as many as possible.
And thus began the great balcony wars. Right. Well, no, I don't disagree, Councillor Wadsworth. It's a point well made. Lockdowns change people's opinions. I suffer from chronic vertigo. There's absolutely nowhere now go near any kind of balcony in any kind of building. However, it's a point well made. You don't have to comment, folks, but I'm sure you've taken that to heart. Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I look forward to the site visit of the 97 floor balcony at the next. I know who's going at the front. Can I just first of all check that you are intending to deliver the full 7% of affordable? Because it doesn't directly come out in the report. Is that a yes?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah, we're looking for a policy compliant affordable. So
fine. It's just the report doesn't met. Well, I might have missed it. And then my next question really comes back to these 3 bedrooms. So you're proposing 5% of 3-bed apartments, and obviously to be policy compliant, it would need to be a minimum of 20%. So am I reading that correct? And your single beds are at 55%, whereas to be policy compliant should be at 50%. So I'm right that as it stands, what you're asking us to agree to today is a non-policy compliance proposal. Priya, but once we approve the housing mix, and that's sealed in.
We aren't approving anything today, or agreeing anything today, Councillor Cohen, but it's a point well made.
You're right, Chair, strictly, except that we're asked 3 questions at the end. And once we've said we're satisfied with the housing mix, that is then sealed in and we can't revisit it. So to that extent, I think in some ways the language is unhelpful for colleagues, because actually we are approving that if we say, yes, we're okay with that housing mix. So
I would prefer the phrasing, we'd be laying down a strong marker as to what would be minded to be agreeable to. Yeah. But it doesn't say that entirely. Yeah, so it is, as Daljeet's doing in a fine stage whisper, it is comments on the housing mix. And I think we're in the process of making those comments about that mix. But yeah.
A really important, well, I think it's really important. like many colleagues here, what happens is we say something now, and then it comes back and we say, oh, we were just commenting, and Dalgit goes, no, you approved it. He said, you said at the pre-app it was okay. So now if colleagues sound wrong on that, then that's fine. But I've been here before.
Points duly noted, Councillor Cohen. I think officers and I'll bring Councillor Sharon in a second. I think officers and the applicants can hear the fact that we're wanting to see a fully compliant, policy compliant in all aspects of policy application come forward. That includes housing mix, as well as various other things that we've touched upon so far, but particularly affordables. Making climate issues, affordability, family friendliness, and a sensible housing mix are key concerns of this panel at the moment, as you'll have picked up over the course of today. Sharon, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask about the parking provision? The report makes quite a good case, doesn't it, for having such a comparatively low number of parking spaces available. You know, you've got 300 bicycle spaces. I would never use one of those. And you have but it's about, well, 380 houses or 55 parking spaces. So I agree, not many people may need a parking space given the location and all the other arguments. But actually, I think that's perhaps a little low because people come visit friends, and parking's at a premium around that site. I know I tried to stop at the speed bank a while back. You cannot park around there. So I don't know if you envisage there might be a problem with parking, people coming visiting, people who live there, because that's quite a lot of properties. And I assume they'll all know somebody who might possibly visit them in a car at some point. Is there a scope to increase the car parking?
It's something which we're trying to achieve a balance on, and certainly for the area where, I mean, officers have pushed us to lower the car parking. The Midland Mill scheme next door had 0 car parking for over 300 apartments, and we were conscious that the local ward members did have some concerns about 0 parking for that number. So this is where we're trying to strike that balance between obviously the climate issues and all the sustainable, the climate change points with regard to actually lowering car provision in the city centre, and so there's a push for that. But then there's also seeking an avoidance of an impact on on-street parking into the wider Holbeck area, and Sarah's report touches on some of the controls that will cover that. So it's certainly an important balance. And then, as Tim touched on, there was car parking originally proposed towards the front of the site at the entrance, and we've taken that away and moved some of it and reduced the number to improve the arrival space and the public space. So it is all about trying to achieve that balance, and hopefully we will be on that from, again, a lot of other schemes in the city centre that are 10 to 15% circular provision, some even lower. So hopefully this balance with trying to achieve all the other space requirements and a push again from the policy of 100% cycle provision, which we're getting very close to, albeit not everybody wants to cycle. I appreciate that.
That wouldn't be for me. Yeah. And thank you for that. And I agree with carbon neutral and everything, but it is the city centre, but actually it's more Holbeck, isn't it? Depending on which side of the river you actually know and live and come from. So I think you're right, it will impact on Holbeck ward far more than city centre. But thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Campbell next.
Thank you, Chair. I think your point about visitor parking is valid, actually, in that I know we've accepted, sometimes reluctantly, very limited residential parking on site. If you do go to visit people, I mean, the bus this morning had a problem looking for somewhere to stop, so I think that's an issue. Can I ask a question? A couple of questions. The first one, though, relates to what I think I heard you said in relation to the 1-bedroom apartments. Did you say there are 1-bedroom, 1-person apartments and 1-bedroom, 2-person apartments?
Yes, correct.
Right. Daljeet, what's the difference?
It's
Well, without wanting to get into people's detail in people's lifestyles, I think no, but it's a fair question because it is an extremely valid question. I was about to say that.
I'm happy to come in.
Do you want to come in on Dalji? Because it is an intriguing question.
In terms of space standards, it's about the size of the bedroom. So you know, you can get a studio, which is a one-bedroom apartment, but there's no reference in the space standards to a studio. A studio is still a one-bedroom apartment, as is a one bedroom, i.e., where you got a layout where you got a separate bedroom and the living accommodation, etc., separate. But those one bedrooms with a double bed in will be a two-person. Yeah, so I think that's the difference. But I'm quite happy since Tim, sorry.
No, the question I'm specifically asking you is, my understanding is the council has a single standard for a one-bedroom flat. There is no difference. So the space has to be the same for a one-person flat or a two-person flat.
I agree with Councillor Campbell. So do you want to come back on that?
I can't. In standard terms, there's no difference. We would be asking for the same standard. So the minimum, I think, is 37 square meters, depending on how the bathroom is laid out. Plus, so you know, that's what we'd be expecting for a one-bed occupancy. Now, there are, sorry, I haven't got the standards in front of me, but there are different levels depending on the level of person occupancy. So I think it might be different for two-person occupancy, and then it increases with, you know, for two beds and so on. So, but I haven't got the standards in front of me. But in this case, I think if you're saying is this proposal going to be policy compliant in terms of space standards? Yes, that's the question. As officers, we've asked the developers side, and they're coming back and saying, yes, these flats will be policy compliant in terms of adopted space standards.
Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Campbell?
Forgive me for labouring it, but at no point when we've discussed space standards in the past have we talked about the principle that if there's only one person in the flat, it's slightly smaller than if there's two people in it. So when did that happen? Because I must have missed that.
I'm not, without the space standards in front of me, I can't confirm if that's exactly the case in this scenario in terms of a studio and a one bed that allows two people. I can do that separately. I'm quite happy to do that. But
you keep saying to us, there is no standard for a studio.
No,
you said in the past, you've consistently said to us, when pressed, the studio we treat in the same way as a one-bedroom flat.
It is, Councillor Campbell.
We make no qualification about how many people are in the one-bedroom flat.
It is, Councillor Campbell. I'm pretty sure it is. But then when you go to two beds,
sure.
then it goes to it does, occupancy does come into it. But I haven't got the standards in front of me.
I'm sorry, I'm not arguing about two bedrooms. We're not arguing about that. I want to know, as you know, I have for some time consistently raised the issue of space standards, and I thought we had a very clear policy.
Now, if you just bear with me, sorry, Councillor Campbell, we've got it. We've brought it up now. So I didn't have an encyclopedia memory, but Gillian's got it. So we'll.
I think we'll be able to answer your questions, Councillor Campbell, very shortly. Just bear with. But it is a new terminology. I don't think I've heard before of a one-bedroom flat for one person. I think that could be sophistry of language to try to avoid saying studio, or it could be a problematic new sort of definition. I'll bring you in a moment. Don't worry. So, Daljeet,
yeah.
do you...
So in terms of the space standards for a one bed, one person apartment is 30 39 square meters in brackets 37. And I think that's the difference between the bathroom areas. And for a 1-bed, 2-person apartment, depending on the number of stories, it's either 50 square meters or 58 square meters. So there is a difference there.
Okay, so that's clarified. Councillor Carlisle, you've indicated you wanted to speak. So, Councillor Carlisle. Peter, do you want to come in and be helpful here? That'd be lovely.
Sorry, Chair, I might be coming in and being unhelpful because what I'm looking at in this is page 114, which states that we've got some 1-bedroom apartments of 40 square meters, which meet that lowest threshold, and some 1-bedroom apartments of 46 square meters. But I'm assuming the 46 square meter ones are the ones we assume 2 people are going to be living in. Although how we're going to make sure 2 people don't live in the smaller one, I don't know. I was being very simplistic in my uptake before of saying 37 square meters, although if you move the bath, there's another one apparently. Anything over 37 for 1 bed's fine. But am I therefore of the assumption, given Daljit's explanation, that anything over 37 isn't fine if we then need to take into account how many people may live there? Because you may have a 1-bed apartment with 2 people and a baby living in it quite easily in many areas, or a 1-bed house, etc. Or to be very friendly people, maybe, but yeah.
Right. That was about 50-50 on the helpful and unhelpful stakes there, Councillor Carlisle. No, but the point's well raised. I'm going to bring in the applicant who could make this a lot clearer, and I strongly suggested just the larger 1-bedroom apartments might make this a lot easier.
Thank you, Chair. These are probably referring to the nationally described space standards, which are sort of now a national standard, which they do refer to a 1-bed, 1-person. I think in layman's terms, that's a studio, and you can fit a double bed in there, but it is designed for 1 person. So it's a 1-bed, 1-person or studio. The other one at 46 square meters, I apologize, but that should be 50 square meters. That is a 1-bed, 2-person flat. So to meet the nationally described space standards as a 1-bed, 2-person flat, you need to be at 50 square meters. And that's probably where it's confusing everyone. So I apologize about that.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's useful. Councillor Campbell, you want to come back on this issue?
Yes. Right. I'll continue to go on about space because I've done it for the last 8 years, haven't I? Can I just get a legal view then? Because the council has its own policy. And if my memory is correct, there were national guidelines and we had to amend the core strategy, if my memory is correct, to bring in some local guidelines which covered Leeds now. Which takes precedence? The agreed core strategy space standards, or these new ones that none of us have actually heard about until this afternoon?
Would you please? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the policies you mention, but it's the policies in the core strategy which will always take precedence, because that forms part of it's the biggest part of the development plan.
That help? Okay, excellent.
I suppose in this case, actually, we're not arguing around the minimum standard, are we? Because these are slightly above. But it'll be an interesting discussion with when we get the next application, which has them in a relative, well, when they're small. Can I ask a couple of questions? Sorry about that. You've mentioned affordables. You've said you'll be policy compliant. We've had the district valuer here. Is the site viable? That's a nod, so that's a yes. Okay, so you won't be asking for us to set aside that. Balconies, Councillor Gruin's not here, but she always raises the issue of balconies, and in particular the size of balconies. Is it a usable space rather than just you're squashed up against the wall, but you can look out if you want to? So I think we need to make it clear that we'd expect the balconies to be usable. I'll just refer you to page 68 on our list, or page 18, depending which one it is, which is the entrance. And at the very beginning, you made play of the fact that you'd had at least 3 goes on the layout of the buildings. Now, you certainly haven't had 3 goes on the landscaping, quite frankly. And this is at best insipid and at worst uninspiring. If you are saying to us, we want a quality development, then what I can't understand is why you can't show us the quality landscaping that goes with it. Because even if it's only aspirational, if I take the artist's impression there, that is really below standard, in my opinion. And it seems to me that if developers took as much trouble over the landscaping around their buildings as they do about the rest of it, we wouldn't have a lot of the struggles that we do have. The final question relates to the 3-bedroom question. Because if I'm brutally honest, I don't think in the city centre we've agreed a policy compliant housing mix development in the last 10 years. You touched on the issue of 3 bedrooms and the possibility of a family use. And you said there's been some basic research about the numbers that you feel you need to provide. Okay. Did that research actually differentiate between, I suppose, 3 individuals renting a flat together or a family? Was there a differentiation between that? And if there was, can you tell us the proportions, presumably around Leeds, of who was moving into these developments that are families and are either 3 individuals who are friends?
Sure, just three questions there then. One, I suppose both in terms of the landscaping, this is emerging. Tim won't profess to be a landscape architect. This is one of Tim's drawings. We've had a landscape architect on board for only a couple of weeks. So that we didn't feel their scheme has actually evolved enough. And today, as it is a pre-app presentation with an emerging scheme where, as you've seen in the pre-app slides, the scale and mass has moved around as we've talked to officers in the last month or two. That was the focus of the efforts and not the landscaping. That's something clearly we'll go forward with those connections through to Bass Road, where we talked about, and engaging with the developer on the Midland Mills side as well to make one coherent approach, and also with highways officers as to the type of street. So that's something which is emerging. Do just want to clarify on the viability side, it's something, again, it's an emerging scheme that it will be continued to be reviewed. So we can't make any promises absolutely today, but they're continuing to look at that. Clearly the number of units has changed since even some of the panel presentation was prepared. So we will see as that evolves further with pre-app discussions with members, with officers, and I'll let Matthew come back on the 3-bed research element.
I'm afraid in terms of the response on the 3-bed research, I haven't got the details here, but we can certainly share that information as part of our discussions on the pre-app. So I can't answer that question today, I'm afraid.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough, but you can clearly see where we're going as a panel with our thoughts regarding this. I'm not seeing any more indicators of questions for the Councillor Campbell. Yeah, go for it.
Quick one that's just struck me, sorry. You said you'd be compliant on affordables. Will the affordables be on site?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, colleagues. In that case, let's, if no one's got any other points to raise, let's move to in section 8, there's 3 questions that we've been asked to consider as part of the paper. So first of all is 8.2. Do members have any comments on the proposed housing mix? Well, I think officers and applicants have heard at length our thoughts on this. We are wanting a policy compliant proposal, and that's in respect to all aspects, including housing mix. I think if any research can be shared with officers, that's very welcome. But we have a housing mix for good reason. Any other further comments, members, on that? Oh, okay. Councillor Cohen, yeah, of course.
I must confess, I mean, I was noting the 3-bed. I hear what colleagues say. I'm more inclined to believe that city centre 3-beds are predominantly going to be 3 friends renting together rather than families. No, I don't. I'm giving a view. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to give a view. While I would want to see more in that area in terms of 3-bed, I wouldn't go to, it wouldn't for me be something that would cause me to necessarily say that's it if the 3-bed didn't quite hit the target percentage, but I certainly want to see more.
I think, well, it's a point now, Councillor Cohen. I think a lot of councillors representing in the city wards and those wards that comprise parts of the city centre, I think in terms of the use of housing we won't want to see the city centre as a place that some families are going to live in. There are excellent schools and other services in the centre these days. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. So we need to see that reflected in developments. I think we want a balanced and diverse community insofar as much as possible. So I'm not seeing it. Councillor Wadsworth, yeah.
At the other end of the scale, I think we need to bottom out this 1-bedroom, 1-person lack and 1-bedroom, 2 people, because how can we stop a 1-bedroom, 1-person being rented out by 2 people? And doesn't really make a great deal of difference. You know, we just need to bottom. I mean, for me, I just think it should be 1-bedroom suitable for 1 or 2 people. But I just think when it comes to decision time, we just need to bottom it out. Otherwise, we shall have the discussion all over again.
That's a fair point. I agree. Yeah. Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that my comments regarding the 3-bedroom and demand for 3 bedrooms doesn't come from nowhere. Like, I am dealing with a lot of really sad, like heartbreaking housing casework, where families are living in overcrowded conditions and like they want to live in a house but can't live in a house. We can't build out more houses because we don't have the space for it. So the only logical place for families to live and still live in the city centre now is in blocks of flats. So that's why I'm so I suppose militant on the issue. And I'm sorry for interrupting you, Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Well said. Councillor Cohen, did you want to come back on that?
Firstly, no offence taken at all at the interruption, because it was an important point. I was simply, and I was not, I want to be very clear, I'm not for 1 second denigrating Councillor Brooks' lived experience. The point I'm making is I think it needs to move substantially towards the policy. I'm simply saying that if it didn't quite hit that, that wouldn't be for me in and of itself. So I'm saying I could see some flexibility around that. That was all I'm saying.
Well, thanks to the both of you, your commentary on that. It's much appreciated. 8.3, yeah. Let me read it out, Councillor Carlo. Do members support the emerging design of the development? Councillor Carlo, Councillor Campbell.
I was just going to say, I mean, we haven't really seen what the building's going to look like. So I know Councillor Campbell was very clear about, or was it Councillor Wadsworth? We seem to have been going around for a while around making sure what Dalgett hears is the right thing for any question. I have no idea what the building's actually going to look like when it goes in, so I don't feel like I can comment on that at this stage. I'll have to see that at a later date. Obviously, the landscaping we've had a lot of comments on.
Yeah, I think we can perhaps comment on the massing and the locational nature of the massing, which I think away from the proposed Midland Mill Tower element, I think is very sensible how that's evolved. So I think we comment on that. Councillor Campbell, you want to come in?
I think I'd echo your point. We can't really comment on the building because we haven't got a decent design. I think you're right though. When we were on site this morning, we talked about the the massing of the particular elements of this, and I think okay, it'll probably be tweaked before they finish, but the principle of the larger building sort of at the back of towards the railway, the disused railway. Was this idea and lower buildings at the front. I think that principle seems to work as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I concur. There's been progress demonstrated through the evolution application, and that's much appreciated. I think it's very much in the right place with regard to that. So no other comments on that. Okay, so 8.4, do members support the approach to car parking provision in the location? Seem to be okay with that. It is in line with typical city centre stuff. Councillor Burke, just a bit of background. Although one thing I would note is I very much agree with Sharon as the point she raised, that can it handle the sheer amount of deliveries in this brave new world of online everything that we've seen? That's my only slight concern, but I think that can be accommodated. Councillor Carley, you want to come in?
I'll come in because people were looking at me at this particular point because I'm a big advocate of people who live in the city centre, not necessarily needing the car. Yeah. That doesn't mean, however, that where I completely agree with, and the problem is in taxis that turn up, deliveries that turn up, visitors that come, they're the people that come in a car. So the point about there being space for those cars that are visiting and those vehicles that are visiting to go is a very important one, because they're the ones that are just strewn anywhere in a street, whereas somebody who lives in this property has no need of a car. So I don't feel that's needed. But yeah, I think that's always a good clear point to put. There are cars belonging to residents, and yourself, Chair, in Hyde Park will know full well what problems are caused by, one, cars belonging to residents when there's not enough space, and two, cars that appear in an area throughout the day and maybe aren't there overnight, and that is a distinction. So yeah, making sure there's visitor space is a key.
Duly noted. Right, that's the questions. Anybody further comments members want to add at this point for this pre-app? Nope. In that case, that's Dal. Did you want to sum up? Oh, Councillor Nash.
Sorry, I was half asleep. Did we make a point about we need more balconies? Yeah.
It's been made, and just to further confuse things, they need to be, with the balconies in the one-bedroomed flats for one person, be big enough for one or two people to have breakfast on the balconies. I mean, these are searching questions that people at Leeds need the answers to. Anyway, but yeah, thank you, Liz, for the balconies point. Dalji, over to you, mate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your comments and your thoughts. That they've been duly noted. I think in terms of the main findings, clearly. There's been considerable discussion around the housing mix, and clearly members want to maximise that and for that to be in line with our space standards. If they're not, members would want to see the appropriate research and clarification. Members support the emerging mass and scale across the site. Obviously, comments on the detailed design will be at the next stage. Members are happy with the approach for less car parking for people who live on the site, but they want to be satisfied that there was sufficient space for visitors, deliveries and taxis. And then we've noted other comments through the discussion about the need for more balconies, to make sure that this is a policy compliant scheme in terms of the affordable housing delivery, and I think the quality of the green space and the details that need to come through for the landscaping. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thanks for Daljit. Everyone's good with that? In that case, thanks for everything. Folks, the next meeting is the Thursday, the 20th of October at 1:30 here in Civic Hall. Have a lovely, safe journey home.